Welcome back. We're going to begin our descent into the obscure and unsolved mysteries iceberg. This iceberg was made by the Iceberg charts user sustained_disgust and will be linked in the description so that you can follow along. This iceberg is also massive, so I will be focusing on the topics that I think are interesting and leaving out the ones that I don't. That being said, this is my first iceberg video, and if you have any tips or suggestions for how you would like to see them come out, let me know down in the comments. Now that that's out the way, let's dive in. We begin our descent with the story of Alberto Gordini. May 3rd, 1753. A gardener by the name Alberto Gordini and his wife are walking in Sicily, Italy. There are different translations. Some state that they're in the town square, and others say that they're in a garden, but each account confirms that there were multiple witnesses to this incident. The story goes that while walking one day, Alberto just vanished into thin air, and not like people turned away and turned back to find him. And when he walked into it, he was suddenly somewhere else, somewhere void, white, and seemingly endless. Alberto stated that he had seen a long-haired being. Some translations state this was a woman. Others say it was a long-haired man, so it is unclear. Allegedly, this being told Alberto that he was in a realm between time and space. He also saw what appeared to be a white canvas, covered in stars and dots that was pulsing. After telling the priest his story, the priest and Alberto agreed to go back to the location of the incident, and when they got there, Alberto disappeared again. Only this time, he didn't reappear, at least not yet. Some theories speculate that this could have been evidence of UFO activity. Others, like the priest, believe that he fell into a devil's trap, a cursed realm where time moves differently, trapping you for eternity. It's hard to say what did happen to Alberto, whether this is an urban legend or an actual documented glitch of some sort, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. The Kinross Incident is the case of First Lieutenant Felix Moncla, who was an Air Force pilot for the United States. Felix was born on October 21st, 1926, and enlisted in the Army after graduating high school. He fought in World War II, and later in the Korean War, this time re-enlisting in the Air Force. The incident happened on November 23rd, 1953. The Air Defense Command spotted an unidentified object on the radar, and scrambled a jet piloted by Felix and Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson to investigate. Robert was having trouble with their onboard radar, so they got all of the information from ground control. Eventually, Felix and Robert began to get close to the object, and ground control was monitoring everything on their radar. They saw two blips, one of Felix's jet and one of the unidentified craft. As they watched these two objects get closer and closer, the two blips appeared to have merged into one. Afraid that Felix and Robert had crashed with the other blip, Ground Command waited anxiously, but the unidentified craft kept going on its same course, completely unfazed, while Felix and Robert's blip vanished into thin air. Attempts were made to contact Felix and Robert, but no response ever came. Search efforts yielded no trace of the jets or the pair, and weather conditions made it more difficult to locate them. An investigation ensued, and one pilot claimed to have heard a brief radio transmission about 40 minutes after Felix and Robert disappeared. Eventually, it was believed that the unidentified craft was a RCAF VC-912, piloted by Gerald Fosberg. The reason Gerald's plane was unidentified was because he was alleged to be 30 miles off course from his original flight plan. Gerald was interviewed and stated that he was not off course. He even said that he had no idea he was being pursued. In 1968, parts of a military jet were found near the eastern shore of Lake Superior, but the Canadian government never confirmed if it was the jet Felix and Robert were piloting, as there are no records of this discovery. In 1955, UFO author Donald Keyhoe wrote in his book The Flying Saucer Conspiracy that an F-89 jet had crashed into a UFO, but it was later revealed to have been a Canadian aircraft southeast of Lake Superior. To this day, we have no clue what happens to Felix or Robert. Could it have been a government cover-up? Aliens? Or maybe something else?
Welcome back, folks. Tomorrow marks the 70th anniversary of an unexplained military aircraft disappearance over Lake Superior.
This is known as the Kinross Incident.
First Lieutenant Felix Moncla and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson were aboard the F-89C. However, neither would return from the mission. About 77 miles north of the Calumet station, both aircraft converged on the radar and vanished. A search that spanned multiple days turned up nothing.
The Jetpack Man.
This morning, yet another sighting of an unidentified person wearing a jetpack flying high above the Los Angeles area about 15 miles from LAX.
I know this might sound like something straight out of GTA, but this is in fact a real thing. I say real in the sense that this is something that has been reported multiple times by multiple people. In fact, the Jetpack Man phenomenon has a total of 6 sightings, starting on August 30th of 2020, all the way into June of 2022. The first sighting happened over LAX airport, where a man was reportedly hovering at around 3,000 feet in the air, close to planes that were coming in and out. Reports from pilots went like this.
We just passed a guy in a jetpack.
Were they up there, left side or right side?
Off the left side, maybe 300 yards or so, about our altitude.
We just saw the guy pass by us jetpack. Use caution. Person in a jetpack reported.
The second sighting occurred in November the same year, and the LAPD ended up releasing footage of what looked like a balloon figure of Jack Skellington. The FBI also later made a statement that they were unable to verify that they had found anybody with any jetpacks. The third, fourth, and fifth sightings all seemed to have been reported by pilots who were in the air, and by the fifth sighting, tower personnel began referring to the Jetpack Man as Iron Man. There was a sixth sighting in June of 2022, though it was reported that the pilots likely saw a human-shaped balloon, and it is not clear if this was actually the Jetpack Man or not. As for the identity of this mysterious person, we still have no idea. We know that jetpacks do exist. Some even use water to propel the user into the air, and while we've only recently began to see these come out to the public, we have no idea how long these have been being developed for. Many speculate that this could be military testing, but maybe this is just a Los Angeles resident with a lot of spare time on hand. Chris Benoit was a professional wrestler for the WWE who over the course of 3 days took the lives of his wife, his 7-year-old son, and himself from June 22nd to June 24th of 2007. Chris was very successful and well known in the wrestling world, so when the news broke of this incident, fans everywhere were shocked. It's theorized that on the 22nd, Chris tied up his wife Nancy and strangled her to death. He then placed the Bible next to her and wrapped her up in a blanket. The investigation found that she had alcohol in her system, as well as hydrocodone and alprazolam, more commonly known as Xanax. Although the levels of the drugs in her system were stated to be at therapeutic levels, mixing them with alcohol would definitely amplify the alcohol's effects. Unfortunately, this was not the same case for Chris's son Daniel, who in the same manner as his mother was also found lifeless and wrapped in a blanket with a Bible next to him. But unlike Nancy, Daniel had an abnormally large amount of Xanax in his system, and it is believed that he was drugged in order to sedate him. This could have been Chris's twisted way of attempting to make this act painless for his son. Daniel's exact time of death is not clear, but the signs of decomposition on Daniel were not as far along as on his mother. This led investigators to believe that he died sometime after Chris took Nancy's life. Finally, on June 24th, another wrestler, Chavo Guerrero, got a voicemail from Chris saying that he was going to be late for that night's show because his wife and son were sick with food poisoning. Chavo called Chris, and while speaking to him, felt that he sounded off. He had Chris confirm everything from the voicemail, then hung up. Chavo tried calling again later, but was unable to get back in touch. It is then believed that sometime after this, Chris went into his home gym and using one of his machines, took his own life. I won't go into details as they are easily searchable, but it doesn't end there. The weird part about this whole story is that about 10 hours before the police discovered the bodies of the Benoit family, an article on Wikipedia was edited to say, Chris Benoit was replaced by Johnny Nitro for the ECW World Championship match at Vengeance, as Benoit was not there due to personal issues stemming from the death of his wife Nancy. Allegedly, this was edited at 4:01 a.m., and police reportedly found the crime scene at 2:30 p.m. later that day. Obviously, the police noticed this and began investigating. The IP address of the person who had put that on the wiki page led back to a student in Stamford, Connecticut, which coincidentally is also the location of the WWE headquarters. 19-year-old Matthew Greenberg was later identified as the person behind the edit, but he claimed that he had no clue and that it was all some freak coincidence. Matthew was well known as a wiki troll who had vandalized other wiki articles in the past, though nothing like this had ever happened. Police did take his devices as part of the investigation, but ultimately cleared Matthew of any wrongdoing.
Okay.
All right.
First, are you a wrestling fan?
Yeah.
Okay. A big one?
Not pretty big.
Okay. Go on.
Okay. Well, over like last weekend, the wrestler Benoit, there was like rumors going on because he missed the pay-per-view and his scheduled dates, which he never does. And I was reading rumors and speculation online.
Where online?
Like on forums. I forgot the exact sites. But I was like.
Okay. Hold on. On forums?
Yeah.
Okay. In any chat rooms?
No, no chat rooms. I was just reading about it, and some rumors came up, and I just.
Yeah. What were the rumors?
That his his family was sick, or someone maybe died, like his wife perhaps, because he missed the pay-per-view.
Okay. And when was that?
Sunday.
Okay, so you saw these rumors. You're not sure exactly what sites, but it was in forums?
I believe so.
Okay.
Mostly I kind of added fuel to the fire. It was really more of my own speculation.
Okay, and what was your speculation?
I just thought that his wife may have died or.
Okay, and you speculate on how?
Nah, I can't. It was wrong. I just cause I saw he never misses a date.
Okay.
Despite this, there are many that believe that Matthew knew a lot more than he let on, and may have been tipped off by somebody inside the WWE association. As far as what possessed Chris to commit those acts, nobody is sure. It is, however, speculated that during his career, he may have developed CTE, which unfortunately affects many athletes who constantly take hits to the head. CTE is a neurodegenerative disease that can change a person's whole way of thinking, cause mood problems, and affect memory. It was also rumored that Chris used steroids and abused alcohol, and this all could have came together to play a part in the events of that night.
Well, the wrestling world in shock today. Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son. Police now treating the discovery as a double murder-suicide. World Wrestling Entertainment says Benoit failed to show for 2 live events over the weekend, and apparently at least one suspicious text message sent to friends prompted wrestling officials to send police to his house. On the phone now, staff writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution site.
The case of the Benoit family is a tragedy, and has left a scar on not only those who were close to the victims, but on the WWE and its millions of fans. Poe Toaster is a name that was given to an unidentified individual who has been visiting the grave of famous author Edgar Allan Poe for decades. Every year, on January 19th, this person would go to Edgar's gravestone, pour themselves a glass of cognac, and celebrate Edgar Allan Poe's memory. They would dress in all black except for a white scarf, as well as a wide-brimmed hat, and would leave 3 roses at the grave after each visit. Eventually, the locals began to catch on to this, and started trying to catch a glimpse of who this person was, despite them doing their best to avoid attention. This tradition is said to have begun in the 1930s, and has likely been passed down from people who were either close to the original Poe Toaster, or others who have heard of the story and wanted the legend to continue. There have been numerous people who have claimed to have started the tradition, but many of the stories have holes in them, and so, the true identity of Poe Toaster has not come to light yet. In 2010, the nightly visits seem to have stopped out of nowhere, maybe because of the media attention, old age, or maybe they just didn't want to continue doing it anymore. The previous 2009 visit would have been the 200-year anniversary of Edgar Allan Poe's death, and many speculate that this could have been a good stopping point. But the tradition would be revived later on, in 2015, when the Maryland Historical Society held a competition to elect a new toaster, in an effort to keep the legend alive and attract tourists. Edgar Allan Poe was one of the most influential authors in history, and his work has been the inspiration to many all over the world, no matter what day and age. It's no wonder some people would want to honor his memory, and somehow, the idea that for decades an anonymous person visited his gravesite in the middle of the night just to share a toast and leave flowers is very fitting of the author's legacy. Not deer refers to sightings of animals that resemble deer, but upon looking closer, are often disfigured or have predator-like features. A lot of these sightings are reported in the Appalachian Mountains and have been linked to the Navajo skinwalker legends. According to the legends, a skinwalker is a being that can take the form and mimic any animal, even people, in order to get closer to its prey. Stories of these beings have been told by Navajo people for decades, and deer are said to be some of the most common forms these skinwalkers prefer to take. A more scientific explanation for the not deer could be diseases like rabies and CWD, or chronic waste disease, as there have been many cases of hunters encountering these sick animals that act completely different due to the effects of the disease. This could also explain the reports of deformities, since these animals can become aggressive and end up with wounds that make them look like walking zombies. So supernatural being or diseased animal, deer on their own are already creepy, but this is still something to consider the next time you're deep in the woods. According to Wikipedia, Tartary, or Tartaria, is a historical name for Central Asia and Siberia. Ignorance surrounding Tartary's use as a place name has spawned pseudo-historical conspiracy theories, including ideas of a hidden past and mud floods. Tartary is made up of central Afghanistan, northern Kazakhstan, and Magnolia, China. People believe that the lost Tartarian city had advanced technologies, but was seemingly wiped out by a mud flood, as well as being demolished and hidden during the events of World War I and II by basically blowing up all of the historical buildings in the area. Again, this is one of those conspiracy theories that took off on social media, primarily TikTok, so do with that information what you will. It feels more like fanfiction, to be honest, as there is no real proof of any lost technology, but then again, maybe that's what they want you to think. Skyquakes are a phenomenon where loud sounds are heard coming from the sky with no visible source, from low hums that vibrate entire homes to trumpet-like horns. Reports of skyquakes have come from places such as Japan, India, Australia, Alaska, and many more. It seems to occur all over the world. We don't have an exact cause for these sounds, but some have speculated that it could be meteors, coronal mass ejections from the sun, and even gas escaping the earth. Seismologists from the University of North Carolina concluded that skyquakes do not come from seismic activity. In Christianity, it is believed that the sound of 7 trumpets will be heard coming from the sky as a sign of the apocalypse.
A lot of us have heard our parents and grandparents say we're in our last days. Is the end actually near, meaning end of the world? Multiple videos of horn sounds coming from the skies around the world over the last few years have gone viral, leaving us wondering what in the hell is going on.
Crazy, man. Man, that's crazy. It's like a trumpet. It's like
Other events such as earthquake lights are a phenomenon in which flashes of lights are seen on or near earthquake activity, and reports date back as far as 869, to which we still have no explanation. With lights appearing around earthquakes and horns coming from the sky, it truly shows how little we know about the world we live in. On August 2nd, 1993, 7 hikers started their journey through the Khamar Daban mountain range. The group was led by a woman named Ludmila Korovina, who was 41 at the time, and consisted of her 6 hiking students: Alexander, Timur, Victoria, Valentina, Tatiana, and Dennis, whose ages ranged from 15 to 23 years old. The students trusted their teacher. Despite her reputation of being tough on them, they all respected her. The forecast on this trip was supposed to be clear skies and nice weather, and in 3 days, the group had planned on meeting up with another group led by Ludmila's daughter, Natalia. For the first 2 days, everything went well. The group had a great time, and the students got a chance to show off everything they had learned together. But on August 4th, one day before the two groups would meet, the weather went south, and the hikers were hit with heavy rain. Unable to light a fire and slowed down by their wet supplies, Ludmila's group decided to call it a day. And by morning, they had a fire set up and were eating breakfast again while planning to meet up with the second group. Except when Natalia's group got to the meetup spot, her mother wasn't there, and her group didn't make it. Natalia continued her hike, assuming that her mother's group had gotten slowed down by the rain. But what she didn't know is that something much worse had occurred. No one had seen or heard from Ludmila's group until 5 days later, on August 10th, when kayakers who were on the river spotted a girl along the tree line. The girl was dirty, and it appeared like she was covered in blood. When they got to her, she was clearly in shock, and after some time she introduced herself. This girl was Valentina. The kayakers took her to safety, and after a few days she told everyone the story of what happened. According to Valentina, shortly after eating breakfast, the group began to make their way to the meeting point, when suddenly, Alexander let out a scream. The group turned to him, and he was foaming at the mouth with blood coming from his eyes and ears. Eventually, he fell to the ground. That's when Ludmila rushed over to him and began attempting to help. She instructed the others to keep moving, but not long after, her screams were heard as well, and the same symptoms began to show on her too. Tatiana was next, and her symptoms were so bad that she allegedly ended up bashing her head into a rock, almost as if she was possessed. Victoria and Timur attempted to flee, but they also developed the same symptoms and collapsed to the ground, spewing blood from their mouths and clawing out their throats. At this point, only Dennis and Valentina were left, but as they ran, Dennis also fell victim to this strange illness. Valentina ran as far as she could until she felt safe and eventually fell asleep, only to wake up the next day inside of the same nightmare as the night before. She realized that her only way to survive would be to go back to the campsite and collect the supplies, so that's what she did. When she got to where everything happened, she found everybody in the same position as before, still and lifeless. She grabbed their supplies and began to follow power lines until eventually, the kayakers found her. A search was not conducted until August 24th, 19 days after the incident allegedly occurred, and when the bodies were autopsied, it was concluded that all of them except for Ludmila had died of hypothermia. Ludmila was believed to have had a heart attack. They all also had bruised lungs. To this day, nobody is sure what actually happened that night. There are theories that they may have stumbled upon a Russian testing area for nerve agents. This is coming from the fact that the victims are said to have been foaming at the mouths, bleeding out of their eyes and ears, and also have had bruised lungs. This could be a good possibility. Novichok gas has been suggested as the culprit. This nerve agent was developed in 1971 and has been used in the past to conduct assassinations. Its effects are dosed similar to the ones the hikers experienced, and ultimately leads to cardiac arrest. Though if this was what took the lives of the hikers, it's definitely being covered up. Another theory is that Valentina was in such shock that she may have thought all of this happened, when in fact something else happened entirely, this being some form of coping mechanism for the trauma she endured. And finally, the theory that during breakfast, the group may have accidentally ingested some form of poisonous mushroom or any other kind of toxic plant. This one is a little difficult for me to latch onto, because the group was well aware of what plants were safe to eat and what weren't, but it could explain why Valentina saw what she saw. This remains as one of the biggest unsolved mysteries, and if you want to watch a full breakdown video, I recommend Nick Crowley's version, which I will have linked below. The May Day mystery starts in 1995, when a freshman from the University of Arizona named Brian Hans was looking through the school's Wildcat newspaper. As he was reading, he stumbled upon page 16, and when he saw it, he was confused. Instead of the regular advertisements, the whole page was filled with weird images, maps, and words. There were two things that Brian noticed: the words Mayday, written in big letters up at the front, and the orphanage, what appeared to be the group behind this page. At the bottom was this face, drawn almost as if it was a signature. Despite it being weird, Brian sort of just brushed it off and continued on with his studies. He didn't see any more weird pages like this in the newspaper for the rest of the semester, until the next year, when he was reading through the newspaper and found another one of these strange pages, labeled Mayday. This is what sparked Brian's curiosity, and from this point on, he would begin investigating who was behind this. The strange part about it was that for somebody to get this much space on a newspaper ad, they would have to pay a lot of money. It already costs money to have a regular-sized ad, but one that takes up the whole page, only to display strange images and weird coded phrases, it just didn't make sense. There had to be some form of motive for wanting to do this. And as he searched, Brian would uncover more ads dating back all the way to 1981. And again, the orphanage group keeps popping up. At one point, Brian began to speculate that this could be some secretive fraternity group, and in order to get in, you would have to solve this puzzle. But despite all of his efforts, he just couldn't decode it. This led him to create a website, MaydayMystery.org, where he would begin to document every ad he found in an effort to get others to help uncover the mystery. He even went on to get a job at the university, which gave him more time and resources to continue his search. In an unrelated series of events, a few years after Brian had attended the University of Arizona, a woman by the name Kate Vesley would also attend the university, and she too would stumble upon one of these Mayday advertisements. This would drive her to conduct her own investigation. One of her first theories was that this was a group of very intelligent students who would communicate in code through these ads, and as she analyzed the pages, she noticed that they featured multiple languages. So Kate thinks, these people have to be smart and have to somewhat be familiar with these languages. The more and more she thought about it, the more she began to think of one person. This person who had also attended the university all the way back in the 1960s. He was a lawyer who fit the profile of somebody who could have been behind these Mayday advertisements. Kate went to look for him at his law office, but he was not there, so she left a note stating that she was a follower of the mystery, then she left. At this point, we have Brian and we have Kate. Both are wrapped up in the mystery, and both doing whatever they can to uncover the answers. We also have Robert, the mysterious lawyer. You see, more and more people began to speculate that Robert was the person behind the orphanage, but he would come out to say that he was not the person. In fact, he was only a proxy between them and the newspaper publisher. The orphanage would give him money, and he would place their ad into the newspaper, but not everyone would believe him. In May of Brian's senior year, while he was on the way to collect the newest issue of the newspaper that was sure to feature another Mayday article, he would get a strange message from people claiming that they were the orphanage. Their message said, "When you see the door, you will be welcomed inside." He would even start getting calls from these people, but he still had no idea who they were. The Mayday mystery began to gain attention, and more pressure was put on Robert. But still, he claimed to only be the lawyer. Kate would eventually contact Brian, and together they would start a Facebook group to try to get more people in on the case. There was even an instance in which a young girl came to Brian and informed him that she thought that the person behind the Mayday mystery was actually the Zodiac Killer, going as far as to tell Brian that she had even contacted the FBI. But despite the growing popularity, no one has ever been able to figure out who was behind these ads. It seems like Brian's life mission is to uncover this mystery, and despite the fact that the Wildcats newspaper stopped printing, the messages didn't stop. I am a lot more skeptical in this part of the story, but Brian stated that he began to receive the messages from the orphanage personally, though anybody could make up a fake name and a fake ad. But still, it appears as if Brian truly believes these are legit. Sierra O'Rourke wrote up an amazing article about this story, and even attempted to contact Robert herself, but unfortunately, all she was able to get out of him was this. When she asked about why this started and what will happen, Robert said, "Total social/theological transformation. As for what will happen, a dramatic transformation beyond any sea of change." As if the mystery couldn't get any more cryptic, I highly recommend you check out this article if you want the full detailed story. If it isn't Robert, I would be pretty surprised. He clearly has a part in all of this, whether it was just paying for the advertisement or some kind of higher role. is still a mystery, and you never know with lawyers. Maybe it was a highly intelligent group of students, and the key to getting into their group was solving these puzzles. Or maybe this was even some elaborate and expensive troll. I guess we'll never know. Greek fire was the name of a napalm-like weapon that the Romans used when fighting on naval ships from as early on as 672 AD. They would spray this substance onto the enemy ships in what resembled an ancient flamethrower. They would then light this substance, and these fires would be nearly impossible to put out. They would even burn on top of the water. It's believed that the Greek fire had a huge role to play in the salvation of Constantinople, but to this day, we have not been able to recreate this mixture. There have been theories that it is a mixture of pine tar, quicklime, and sulfur, but the recipe was a closely guarded secret, and like many other ancient technologies from that time, has been lost. Seeing as this was such a closely guarded secret, it's likely that those who knew the recipe took it with them to their graves, making the Greek fire another ancient tool lost to history. There's an old story of a Spanish soldier from the city of Manila. The soldier was guarding the Palacio del Gobernador in the Philippines when on October 25th, the Governor General of the Philippines was murdered in an assassination plot by Chinese pirates. Despite the death of the general, the Spanish forces still guarded the palace. That is when our soldier, who in some versions is named Gil Perez, began to grow tired and dizzy. They leaned up against the wall, and slowly, their eyes began to close. But when they woke up, they were no longer in the palace. In fact, the soldier woke up in Mexico City, thousands of miles away from where he initially was. Eventually, Mexican authorities spotted him, and seeing as he was still wearing his military uniform, he was detained. When they asked him what he was doing, he told them that he was a guard, and even let them know about the governor's death. But at that day and age, news didn't spread as quickly as it does now, and so they had not heard about the governor's death and didn't believe him. He was held for months, and it wasn't until somebody from the Philippines recognized him and informed the guards that he was there on the bay, the day that the governor had been assassinated. Despite being confused, they released the soldier and sent him on his way. It was never revealed how this soldier went from the Philippines to Mexico, or if his name was really Gil. To me, it seems like more of an urban legend. But then again, it makes you wonder. In the UK, there's a 51-year-old man by the name David Hampson, who for almost 10 years would go out and stand in the middle of traffic until he got arrested. The thing is that David has never spoke a word to anybody while this is occurring. Not to the police, lawyers, or doctors. Nobody knows why he refuses to talk. There's even been a time where he was allegedly holding on to the grill of somebody's car and just wouldn't let go, all while still not saying a word. As of 2021, he's been arrested about 9 times and even set his jail bed on fire on one occasion. His mental health has been a huge topic of debate, but unfortunately, with David refusing to speak to anybody, no accurate assessment of his mental state has been able to be found. At the moment, it seems like he has been in jail following an arrest that happened in 2021, where he was sentenced to 3.5 years behind bars. With this, David could be out by 2025, and it is likely that he will continue the same pattern. If you ask me, it seems like David might be one of those people who prefers to be inside of jail than the outside world, but I'm not a doctor or a therapist, so that is just my opinion. We'll just have to wait until he gets released and see what he does next. Andy Kauffman was a beloved comedian who was very popular throughout the late 90s. Unfortunately, Andy passed away in 1984 at the age of 35 after being diagnosed with lung cancer about 2 years prior. This devastated his friends, his fans, and his family. Andy was so loved that after his passing, an awards show was named in his honor, and it was at this awards show that his brother Michael Kauffman would announce that he had found a paper that detailed Andy's plans to fake his death and to return in 1999 inside of a restaurant on Christmas Eve. Obviously, this took everyone by surprise, but Andy was known for his outrageous stunts, and faking his death seemed like something he was capable of. He was an entertainer after all. And so, the belief that Andy faked his death began to grow amongst fans. Fast forward to 1999, the year that Michael stated his brother was going to come back. Michael did end up going to the restaurant that Andy had specified in his note, but when he got there, Andy was nowhere to be seen. Instead, another person came up to Michael and handed him a letter that they claimed came from his brother Andy. Inside of the letter, Andy let Michael know that he was happy and living a quiet life now, that he wanted to get away from all of the noise. Obviously sad that his brother wasn't there, but happy that Andy was living a quiet life now, Michael accepted this. And 14 years later, in 2013, Michael would shock the world with more news of his brother. At another awards show in the Gotham Comedy Club, Michael took to the stage, but this time, he was accompanied by a 24-year-old woman. Michael would then introduce this woman as Andy Kaufman's secret daughter, who was born 5 years after Andy had allegedly passed away. This woman went on to say that Andy did in fact fake his death because he wanted to live a quiet life and raise a family. She stated that her mother owned a business and that Andy was helping her run it while staying out of the public's eye. But this was a complete lie. The woman's true identity was quickly revealed to the public. Her real name, Alexandra Tatarsky, an actress from New York whose actual father was a doctor in Manhattan. Her claims were further debunked when Andy's girlfriend at the time of his death stated that it was impossible because she was with him when he passed. She saw it with her own 2 eyes. But Alexandra wasn't the only one catching heat, because Michael Kaufman was on the other end of everyone's scope as well. People would claim that this was all a publicity stunt, but Michael would go on to say that he was the victim of the hoax as well, and believed that this girl was not acting alone, that her and some unknown persons took advantage of him. Obviously, this hasn't stopped people from being skeptical of him, but in my opinion, I think it is possible that some bad faith actors took advantage of Michael's grieving and tricked him into believing that his brother was still alive. There are those who still believe that Andy could be out there somewhere, but it is more likely that this hoax just got out of hand and managed to fool even those who were the closest to Andy.
Almost 30 years after his death, a brand new Andy is alive rumor is raging through the internet just over the past 24 hours. It takes a little explanation. At the show, Andy's brother Michael took the stage and said that although he watched his brother die, he now has questions. He talked about finding in his brother's writings plans to fake his own death and then to reappear in 1999 at a certain restaurant. Michael says he showed up to the restaurant back then and was handed a letter telling him Andy was happily married with 2 children and didn't want anyone else to know, especially their father. Did Michael Kauffman reveal the greatest hoax, or are we now just victims of another one? What's your take on what happened on Monday night?
I'm still trying to process it all. There were articles that came out today that have forwarded the action, but you know, regardless, I'm questioning things as much as you and everybody else is.
Now, Michael, I'm sure you know there's a report from the Smoking Gun website that this woman is an actress.
Yes.
And they say that you recruited her to play this role, according to a source of theirs. Can you respond to that? Is that true?
That is not true.
So the Smoking Gun source is lying. You did not recruit this woman. You never saw her until that moment.
Right.
And you've
The MV Joyita was the name of a yacht that disappeared in the South Pacific in October of 1955. This boat had 25 passengers and crew, but when it was found sometime after it disappeared, there was not a single soul on board. The Joyita initially departed the Apia harbor at about 5 a.m. It was supposed to leave earlier, but due to some complications with the boat's clutch, their departure was pushed back. The trip was only supposed to take about 2 days, and the ship was transporting cargo to the Tokyo Islands. But on the 6th of October, a report was made at the Whakaofo port, the port that the Joyita was supposed to be arriving at, that the ship was late and nowhere to be seen. There were no distress signals received, but a search mission began and lasted until the 12th of October. The search covered almost 100,000 square miles, but nobody could find the Joyita. Until November 10th, when a merchant ship spotted the Joyita about 600 miles off the course that it was originally on. The ship was partially underwater and drifting in the ocean. This was reported, and soon, an investigation was conducted. In it, they found that the radio was set to the International Marine Radio Telephone Distress Channel, but unfortunately, faulty wiring had prevented any distress signal to travel as far as it was designed to. All of the life rafts were gone, as well as the boat's dinghy. On board was a doctor's bag that contained a scalpel, a stethoscope, and bloody bandages. There was a surgeon on board who was on the way to do an operation at their destination. so this would explain the bag, but not the bloody bandages. Somebody had to have gotten injured, either before or during the time that everybody disappeared. The ship's hull was checked, and it was actually in good shape. It turned out that the engine's cooling system had corroded, and this is what allowed water to enter the ship and begin slowly sinking it. By the time the crew noticed the leak, it would have been too late to try to find it. The electric clocks on board stopped at 10:25 p.m. This would hint that the series of events took place sometime during the evening. There are many theories as to what happened. Some believe that the captain, Captain Thomas Henry Miller, was injured. This would explain the bloody bandages, and without an experienced sailor managing the leak, everybody would begin to panic, ultimately deciding to abandon the ship. Another theory brings up that the captain was in major debt, and desperate to finish the delivery, he continued onward, after discovering that there was a leak. This could have created tension between him and the crew, leading to a mutiny, and again, resulting in everyone panicking and abandoning ship. But no matter what theory, there seems to be no clue as to where the people ended up. The ocean, as beautiful and full of life as it is also one of the most terrifying places on Earth, and has a reputation for taking the lives of countless souls, swallowing them up, never to be seen again. It's because of this that we may never get the answer of what happened to the Joyita and all of its passengers. In 1977, a couple in the UK, whose names were Caroline Bond and Peter Bolton, were working on restoring a local post office they had purchased, and on September 17th, Caroline spotted something on their property. She got closer to get a better view. There, she saw a strange green blob floating around the property, at one point being less than 15 feet away from her. She called over her husband Peter to witness this as well, but Peter had to go back to get his glasses. It was at this time that Caroline went over to some people who were using a telephone booth and let them know about what she was witnessing. Together, Caroline and this group of people watched as this glowing blob floated around the area. In an interview, Caroline said this when asked if this experience upset her. "No, I was quite interested in it. I wanted to go and look for it in the next night. I was quite excited and told everyone else. It seemed like a kind of spaceship to me. When it was above the tree, it appeared to be elongated, although it was an oval when I first saw it in the yard. It didn't seem as if it was on a sort of pole. It did not look like a figure of any sort, but I cannot be sure. It was not that clear. It glided in front of the barn about 2 meters above the ground, and appeared about 1 meter wide and bright, but it was much brighter when it was up in the sky. I have never been interested in this sort of thing, but I am now." Another man named George Stone, whose house was on the street that Caroline witnessed the object at, also claimed to have seen it. Down the road, other witnesses also reported seeing a similar object. They said they saw what appeared to be red lights coming from the green glowing object. This is a picture that shows the path that the object took when Caroline first saw it. The old post office is where Caroline and Peter were, and you can see how the object moved to the barn and then to the tree by Mr. Stone's property. That night, witnesses stated that when the object got to a certain point in the sky, it just stopped and stayed there for some hours. The next night, more people witnessed the objects in the sky, including Peter again, only this time, a man named Anthony claimed that one of the objects had come to his vehicle while he was driving, and as he tried to speed off away from it, the object stayed close until it slowly faded away. Now this is where it gets weirder. Around a week after Peter and Caroline had witnessed this, they started to get really sick. They were having horrible headaches, they were vomiting, and were in constant pain. Eventually they couldn't take it anymore and had to go to the hospital. They were examined, but no direct cause for their illness could be found. Their symptoms were, however, very similar to those of radiation poisoning, and many speculated that this illness could have been the result of being so close to the strange floating object. The pair did eventually get better, but they never did find out what made them so sick. UFO sightings and radiation have always been linked together, which has led many to believe that what they saw that day may not have been from our planet. The Cold Cigarette is the story of an Italian man named Carlo Rossi, who on July 25th of 1952 was out fishing in the Serchio River in Italy. There, he saw a black saucer-like object floating above the river. Carlo got closer, and when he did, He noticed that there was a tube-like thing going from the object and into the water. He also noticed that there was a dome, and it appeared to be glowing blue. Unable to move, Carlo continued watching this thing. That's when someone or something came out of it. This being looked around and spotted Carlo directly, pointing right at him. This terrified him, and Carlo dropped to the ground. That's when he felt a surge of electricity run through him. When he looked back up, he saw that this object was way up in the sky and disappearing right in front of him. This terrified him so much that he kept quiet about this experience, out of fear that people would think he was crazy. But despite this, about 2 months later, he was visited by a person he didn't know in one of his favorite places to hang out at. This person was dressed nicely and spoke to him in a polite manner, but they asked Carlo if he had seen any sort of plane floating above the river. Carlo hadn't told a soul about this, but with this person asking him if he had seen anything weird like that, Carlo took it as a direct threat and denied seeing anything. He knew he had seen something he wasn't supposed to, and that's when this man handed him a cigarette with a strange marking on it. Under the pressure, Carlo took the cigarette and began to smoke it, hoping that it would ease his anxiety, but immediately, he began to feel sick. Carlo got dizzy, and despite wanting to continue to smoke the cigarette, the unknown person took it, crumbled it up into pieces, and threw it away. Carlo had been quiet, but now, things were different. He began to feel that he was being watched, like he was being threatened for seeing something he wasn't supposed to. The paranoia made him go up to the government, where he made a sworn statement describing everything he had seen that day on the river. There is a website, ufoology.patrickgross.org, that has a really good breakdown of the incident, as well as multiple news sources on the story. But ultimately, the author, Patrick Gross, lands at the conclusion that this story could have just been a media or a witness hoax, maybe even both. There is not enough evidence to definitively prove Carlo's story, but there are multiple news articles about it from the late 1900s. And even this drawing of the craft that Carlo had allegedly seen. Is this evidence of UFOs? Or even the infamous Men in Black? I don't know, but it's definitely strange. If you made it this far, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2. Let me know which mystery was your favorite down in the comments as well. And as always, thanks for watching.